Hello, my name's Alan Foom, and today I'm going to talk about ducks. No, not the birds you find in ponds or lakes or rivers, but drilled and uncompleted wells, and why they're so important to the oil market. So, why is this important? Well, a duck is a drilled but uncompleted wells. I'll explain what completions are in a minute. But a well needs to be completed in order to be produced, so you need to install the equipment, the tubing, and everything else. And there's an inventory of wells in the pipeline to replace older wells as they are decommissioned. But not all ducts will be completed because the rock isn't going to be good enough, or there are all sorts of other potential reasons. Now, each month, the Energy Information Administration, the US government body, publishes a drilling productivity report, which includes a supplement for ducts or drilled uncompleted wells, duct supplement. And these figures are watched closely to try to predict future oil consumption or production in the USA. Reason being that a well cannot be produced until it's completed. You have to drill it first, but then you have to complete it second. So this is a life cycle of a typical well, or at least the early part of it. So initially you do location selection, well design, and all the permitting that's associated with that, permitting with the local authorities, state authorities, etc., in order to be able to proceed with the well, plus also the internal process within a company in order to get the project approved. Produce a well design document, etc., etc., etc. Once that is done, then you will drill from a pad. And drilling typically takes somewhere between 20 days and 30 days. It depends on the type of well, area, well length, etc. But it's about a month generally. Sometimes it's less than that. The well will then be logged, so the various tools that you will get information from the well, and you will analyze the results. And then you make a decision whether to complete the well or not. Once that's done, the well will then be completed and fracked. So I have a specialist fracking crew that comes in to do that, and a completions crew that will install the tubing. Once that's done, the well is then connected to the infrastructure during a process called hookup, and then you can produce the hydrocarbons. So that's typically the life cycle of a well. Now, the ducts are the wells that are in this stage of the life, that are past this stage of the life cycle, so around here. A little bit about completions. What a completion is, it's all the equipment that's inside the well to enable production to take place. So completion's got several different objectives. You need to enable hydrocarbons to get into from the reservoir, from here into the well. You have tubing to control the flow rates, keep out any other fluids from any other zones. Particularly, let's say if you've got a water-bearing zone up here, you want to make sure that that doesn't get into the well bore. Keep out rock and sand fragments, because they tend to shred your processing facilities, which is not a good sign. Also, in some areas, you might want to shut off depleted zones as more for conventional rather than unconventional, and try to keep out water ingress, again, more of an issue with unconventionals than it is conventional. Plus, also, you can enable things like gas lifting, where you pump natural gas down the well in order to aerate a column to make it lighter, pump various inhibitors to remove scale buildup, etc. So this is what a completion is. Tubing inside a well to enable the production to take place. And then you have the fracking crew. So this is a picture from frackspreadcount.com showing the different facilities around the well site during a fracking job. So you have the pumps, monitoring, the wellheads are located in the central part here. So you have an area roughly the size of a football field around it, with all the associated equipment. So all this equipment is brought in specifically for the frack job, is then taken out and moved elsewhere. So it's also known as a frack spread. Dedicated crew, and they will go from well to well to do the specific frack jobs. Quite often it's done as a batch job, so because obviously you've got to get all these people in here onto the site. If you've got several wells that are here ready to be fracked, you frack them one at a time. That's all done by the fracking crew. Then they leave, and then you've got the hookup crew that tie everything into the main pipeline. Pad drilling like this is far more efficient because you get 7, 6, I don't know, up to 8 to 10 wells from a single pad, and it'll all radiate in all directions from here. A bit like an offshore oil rig, but obviously done onshore, and has less in terms of impact on the community if you do it this way. But from when a well is drilled to when these people show up, the well is called a DUC. Now, the frac spread count is published weekly by Primary Vision Network, and there's a bloke called Mike Rossano who publishes videos about this. He publishes a lot of other oil and energy-related videos, and really worth listening to. So this is the frac spread count, which mimics the rig count quite well. I'll come to that in a second. It gives you a snapshot of the level of activity in the oil patch and how many wells are likely to be put into production. So this is the Baker Hughes rig count, and you can see my earlier video on that particular topic, which is in the sky blue. This is over the last year, so this is the time of COVID. So this is the COVID fall off. And then the light green here is the frac spread count. And this is the Texas freeze of February 2021, where effectively fracking stopped. And I'll tell you basically because the water froze and you couldn't carry on fracking. And generally frac spreads versus rig counts, they're about 50 to 60%. So roughly, let's say half as many frac spread crews as there are rig crews. Because again, they're dedicated crews and they'll go from site to site. But tells you what's going on in terms of actually bringing new wells into the production. And the Texas freeze is quite important because there's a bit of seasonality. So these are the main basins where you have activity. So you have Bakken and North Dakota, where it's blinking freezing during the winter. You have Eagle Ford along the Gulf of Texas, where it's kind of pleasant. So these are the temperatures, curves in Celsius. Sorry, it's not in Fahrenheit for my American viewers. And that's freezing point. So Bakken, effectively, during the winter, you can use heating with water for the frac jobs, but it's kind of expensive and people tend not to. So we'll tend to do fracking in the summer in the Bakken, less so in the Marcellus, etc. Whereas when you get into the Permian, which is located here, that's the Permian, that's the Permian temperature curve. It doesn't often freeze in West Texas, New Mexico, but it did on that occasion, hence the fall off in the fracking. So why would a DUC well remain a DUC? Because not all DUC wells are completed. Now, there's some logistical things. So as I mentioned with pad drilling, waiting for the availability of a fracking crew, because again, you need to get all of these things in a row. The well pad might be waiting for infill pipelines. Again, you need a pipeline to take it to the processing plant, because you can't realistically produce a well without one. I mean, okay, you can do a bit of trucking if it's a relatively low GOR gas oil ratio oil, but in places like West Texas and the Permian, there's quite a lot, in the Eagle Ford in particular, there's quite a lot of associated gas. So you really would want access to a gas pipeline, particularly if you're a large company and flaring is less of a big issue. Big waste, frankly, a bit of a tragedy. But if you can get the well hooked up to a gas pipeline as well, you can then sell the gas. You might have drill the well early to hold on to mineral rights. That's an issue to some extent with leasing agreements for private oil and gas leases in the USA. And you may complete later. So that's held by leasing. That's not that often, but it can exist. Also, you may be taking a step out. So you're moving outside the core area to a less well-known area, and some of those may not work. May have a relatively poor zone, which might not meet where the initial results from the logging, initial analysis of the well data shows that you probably ain't justified in completion because you're unlikely to meet the economic thresholds. So in that case, the well is decommissioned. There could also be all sorts of reasons in terms of finance, cash flows, permit holdups, etc. I mean, there's been a bit of an issue in terms of induced seismicity or small earthquakes due to fracking in some places. That's held back a few things. So there's all sorts of reasons why wells, DUCs tend to stay DUCs. The main one of those is actually poor rock. So you drilled a well in a new area, didn't really work out. The others tend to be somewhat temporary. So the EIA published the DUC Inventory. So these are the amount of wells that are outstanding. So that's 5,000 wells. So just before COVID, we had 9,000 DUCs, 9,000 drilled but uncompleted wells. And Permian, you can see, is king. So you had a big increase in drilling in the Permian from 2016, but the Permian had an issue with a lack of gas pipelines. That's being addressed. New pipelines are being laid, but that's taken some time. Then you had the Bakken and the Eagle Ford. Eagle Ford has a much better gas pipeline network. And then Niobrara, and then the shale basins, which is Marcellus and Utica and Appalachia in America, and Anadarko area in Oklahoma, which is both gas and oil. So what has happened is There's growth up until 2016. There's a slight decline when oil price, since we had the falling oil price. Then a recovery, then Permania, when extra wells were drilled in the Permian, but you didn't have the pipeline. And then COVID struck. And what's happened since COVID is we've had a lot more completions activity than we had drilling activity. Well, it makes sense, because if you've got a well that could be completed, it's brought on production faster and cheaper than drilling a completely new well. That's now declining. So the amount of DUCs has gone from about 9,000 to near just 5,500. So that's maybe spurring new drilling activity in the future. So if you're looking at monthly well completions versus production, there's a much more better correlation than there is with the rig count, because again, each new well adds production and replaces old wells. Again, Permian, very good growth. So less growth in the Eagle Ford and the Bakken, because there's been less activity. And you can see in the Bakken the activity of seasonality, where there's less completion work in the winter because it's freezing, and you need about 1.5 to 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools of water for a typical frack job. May sound a lot, but it's a lot less than people use in watering golf courses. So to sum up, what's so important about a DUC? So it's drill uncompleted well and the larder. It's what you've got coming up in the future. And basically, through the well cycle we had before, we've shown you earlier, you're putting wells onto completion, fracking, and then adding things. Now, some wells will always be DUC, some of them will be unstay completed due to poor rock. If it's been a DUC well for 4 or 5 years, it's going to stay that way. Now, there are roughly half as many frac spreads as rigs, and there's also operational seasonality. So again, it takes time to put everything together. And the completion rate is also dependent on pipeline development, particularly for areas that have got a lot of associated gas, like the Permian and the Eagle Ford. And since COVID, DUC inventory has been depleting. Drilling has slowed down more than fracking existing wells for fairly obvious reasons, because fracking existing wells is economically better. You deplete the larder before you start putting new stuff in. But when will drilling accelerate? And it's accelerating, it's increasing steadily, as seen on my previous video, but it's not yet really taken off. Now, should oil prices stay relatively high, it could well be better times in the oil patch. So thank you very much. Please like, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.